Platform.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. Everybody is talking about the VAT. That's all we've heard of for the past several days. Wherever you go, people are talking about the VAT, and they are not being complimentary about it at all. Today, to give us an expert opinion, we have Mr. N.R. Gajendran, who is an expert on taxation. Welcome, Mr. Gajendran.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Gajendran, let me ask you, why in the world did the government have to do this on the 1st of January and ruin everybody's new year? Is there some fiscal reason why it had to be on the 1st of January? Why couldn't it start next week?
I don't think it was any intention, but basically if you see when it comes to imposition of taxes, the import levies are generally made on the date of the Gazette, on the day it's announced, generally on that day. The income taxes come into effect from 1st of April because the tax year, the base year is year of assessment that starts from 1st of April. Generally the consumption taxes, VAT and SSCL and things like that, comes from 1st of January. But it doesn't mean, because the variations took place even before that. This was not a budget proposal, though it was stated in the budget. It was a proposal before the budget, and the law was stated that once enacted in a particular month, it will come into effect the beginning of the next month. And there was also a rush because this was getting delayed. There was also a rush because we had to show that we are ticking the box on major issues with the IMF to get the second tranche, which we have got now. So revenue consolidation has been one of the primary focus for the government and that of the IMF, and that's the reason why it came on 1st of January. So it is coming all together. It's not only 1st of January, before that also the rates have been revised, SSCL has come, the income tax rates have gone. So it has all come together in that sense.
But Mr. Gajendran, according to a report today by the World Food Programme, and they are talking about December 2023, they said that 27% of Sri Lankan households are already borrowing money in order to pay for food. Now, this is staggering. And now, on top of that, we've got this VAT added on to it. You spoke of ticking the box, but aren't any socio-economic studies done before the government simply ticks a box and increases the burden on the people?
Yeah, now as you said, more and more people are struggling to find their food on the plate. It's not surprising, because if you see before COVID, if someone had 100,000 rupees as money available for this, I'm just taking a number, for spending, at that time, and say he was not liable for income tax, he had the only consumption tax was VAT at 8%. And because of the threshold was pretty high and also exemptions on essential items, the effective rate would have been about 4. So 4,000 would have gone for, if he is consuming 100, 4,000 would have gone for taxes, he would have had about 92 to 96. Now the VAT rate has gone to 18%. There is SSCL is at 2.5%, and SSCL, don't forget, is a cascading tax. When you go through the supply chain, it accumulates the tax, cascades. So the effective rate of SSCL, though it's 2.5%, it can be more than that. So 20, 21, 22% of 100,000 is going for consumption. But don't forget, from 2019 to now, the value of rupee depreciated. Even though the inflation is now at 3%, the value, the purchasing power of rupee depreciated almost by 80 to 100%. So now if you had earlier 96 for spending, now after taxes, that is now consumption taxes, you will have about 80, 78, 50% is about 38, 40,000 rupees. So naturally, incomes have not risen for people. In fact, most of the vulnerable people, the lower rung people, their employment income, the earning capacities have immensely depleted because the SMEs are virtually getting wiped out, you know. So it's coming all together. The depreciation of the rupee, the price increasing, the inflation that has taken place over a period of time, the price increases of the goods, and now the taxes.
Now, Mr. Gajendran, this is all focused on more revenue for the government. But is this revenue enough for the fiscal target?
We are a democracy. Every government, particularly democracy, government needs revenue. It is rightful and legitimate because it has to provide for education and health. We are not spending enough, but it has become sort of the birthright for the people. We are in the 21st century. It's a must. Education, every child should have the right to be educated, and health care should be there. And also you need money for safety and security. You need money to look after the vulnerable people. You need money to provide for some public utilities and facilities which private sector will not get involved. And there will be investments also where in areas private sector will not get involved. But the problem now, what has happened is tax, it has to be reasonable. It should be bearable. If it is not reasonable and if it is not bearable, it will lose its legitimacy. And when it loses its legitimacy, there is generally a resentment and there is an impact on the government. This will be felt as we go along. Don't forget what has happened is over a period of time, over a period of from independence, we were one of the more prosperous countries in the region, you know, and our reserves are somehow, this said is 17 months we had capacity to import. So all that is destroyed because of the entitlement culture, right? I think, and the populist culture, the politicians have been pronouncing it, you know, and this culture has to stop. So we are paying for it. We are bankrupt. So,
but you're speaking of culture, but what about the political culture of corruption?
Yeah.
So far there's only been lip service paid towards wiping out corruption. We have anti-corruption laws brought in and all that, but we are yet to see any person of importance being arrested or charged.
If I bring, your question is also there earlier, we are getting enough tax revenue, whether we can get the tax revenue. Now, in the early 90s, our tax to GDP was about 22% to 24%. We went down to an abysmal 7% or 8%. And this year, they expected to be 11%. We might end up 12%. We might end up at 11%. We have done well in the last few months. If you see the reports, we have hit the revised estimate was about 2.8 trillion. We have hit 3.1 trillion. So still there is a gap, and by 2025 or something, we are saying we should be achieving 14% or 15%. So we have still that 8-10% deficit. Now we are trying to open up files. You are trying to bring in people who are not paying the taxes, SMEs who are evading the taxes, or they are not paying those taxes properly. You are trying to bring the teachers' taxes, professionals into it who are not paying the taxes. But can you achieve that 10% deficit? Where is that money? That answers your question. This 10, if we, our GDP is about 31.5 trillion for next year. 10% is 3.5 trillion. 5% is 1.5 trillion. Imagine we get some of those monies. So that is the whole problem. So unless otherwise, the next government, that is the change that people are expecting, is able to deal with malfeasance, non-feasance and misfeasance and palm greasing, should stop. If you see the president, rightfully so, in his closing remarks of his budget speech, he said corruption vulnerabilities has to be eliminated. This is the only thing. If you don't do this, I think this cycle is going to repeat.
Well, let's hope the president will walk the talk, because so far there's been a lot of talk about corruption, not a lot of action.
I think this lot of responsibility is there with the people. First and foremost, to my little mind, every political party for the next election must come, when they are putting out their candidates, they must say, to our best of information and knowledge, these are people of men and integrity, and they have no questions about their honesty, and they have to give them a certificate. If they are unable to say that, then there is a problem. And also people mustn't get carried away with this entitlement. There will be some goodies will be given near the elections. They must see, only thing is, they will know who are the people who are corrupt, who are the people who have robbed the money, right? We can't be in the position, if not for this is a small island. It's a very small island, 22 million people. We have plenty of sunshine. We have good water, fresh air, green everywhere. How can we be in this position? What we need little money for health and education and other stuff. So we couldn't have gone bankrupt. Food security is becoming an issue for us. It can't be an issue. Yesterday one CEO told me, I don't know, carrot was some 1,200 or 1,600 rupees. In Norele, some 800 rupees. He said, we are just plucking from that, and how is it? It's growing on its own. So we have to deal with that. Even the intermediaries in the food distribution, storage and distribution, who is making the money? The intermediary. The farmers are poor.
On that note, we'll go for a short commercial break. Don't go away.
The People's Platform.
TV1. TV for life.
CEB unions denounce proposed Sri Lanka electricity bill and launch 3 days of protests. Ceylon Electricity Board cracks down on social media use by employees. No borrowing, no printing. President says there is no alternative apart from increasing taxes. Presidential election before October 2024, says UNP's Vajra. Iran and Harsha maintain their position on SJB's formation of alliances. Sri Lanka names squad to face Zimbabwe.
TV1. TV for life.
මම යනවා බැංකුවට ගිහින්. මං එනකම් මේවා හොඳට බලා ගන්න ඕනේ.
හරි හරි සර්. මම බලා ගන්නම්.
හරි හරි බලා ගන්නන්න නෙමෙයි. මේක ඇවිල්ලා හොරු පැනපු තැනක්.
නෑ සුසත් අයියේ. මං අයියට කොලේ වහන්නේ නෑනේ. අපි අයියේ මේ දවස පටන් ගන්නෙත් පහන්නේ තියලා.
සර්කස් කාරයෝ හෙට රාත්‍රී 8ට සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්
TV1, Sri Lanka's premier infotainment channel. In support of Sri Lanka's unique tradition of art and design, presents The Genius of the Place, the story of Jeffrey Baba, a film by Abdel Aziz. Exclusively aired in Sri Lanka on TV1, January 7th, 2024 at 7:30 p.m.
I've had this idea for a few years now to go on a quest to try and discover who he was.
Why did you have to go for something like this?
I want them to see this film and say, oh my God, this country is beautiful.
Was there a motive behind this whole documentary to promote tourism?
It was an unintended consequence, I'd say, Maria. And so when I started this film, I had an idea of a story. But when I ended it, I had a whole different understanding of who he was.
20 years later, we are still finding every opportunity to honor the genius of the place.
Newsfirst exclusive with writer and director of The Genius of the Place of the Laziz. 5th of January 2024 from 9:30 p.m. onwards on TV1. Streaming live on Newsfirst YouTube and Facebook channels.
The People's Platform.
Welcome back. This is the People's Platform and we are talking about VAT. And today we have Mr. N.R. Gajendran, expert on taxation. Mr. Gajendran, now we were talking about the revenue side. It's only fair that we look at the expenditure side of the government. Now, usually when a government goes bankrupt, the leaders of the political leaders in that country, they implement measures to reduce expenditure. But are we seeing this in Sri Lanka? Have we seen this over the past 18 months?
Not at all. It's a sad thing. If you see the expenditure to GDP in 2023 was some 18.7%. It is going up by about 3.5% to 22.3%, 23.2%, 3.5% increase. Leave aside governments. In a home, if someone loses his job, if earning is impaired, what do they first do? You will look for income opportunities. First, you will cut down your expenditure. If you don't have money, you can't buy things. You will have to borrow. You have to beg or to steal. Now, governments had a privileged situation, they can print money. That's what we did. Now, with the independence of the central bank being brought in by the new act, you can't just print money. So, you have to borrow, right? But if you see the expenditure is reaching 7 trillion next year. People might say that it is because of interest. We have about additional interest 500 billion. Maybe increased in salaries. Government servants, there are 1,400 government servants.
1.4
million. Sorry, not 1.4 million. That means for almost every 15 of us, there is one government servant there serving us.
Yes, but also you have to remember that you can't say that there's 22 million in the population and 1.4 million government servants. It is a measure of how many people of working age we have. Yeah. So possibly 7 or 8 million.
Exactly.
And then of that you have 1.4 million who are government servants.
And whether we need them, so many people. Do we need so much of the military of altogether 500,000 people. So, you know, all these expenditures has to be now. They say you can't do anything about that. What about the people? People also can't do anything about it. So, the whole focus is on revenue and not on expenditure, because I believe even the multilaterals are focusing on revenue consolidation and fiscal responsibility. They don't directly touch on expenditure. But if you see the expenditure ratios internationally, 20-22% seems to be reasonable. But it is totally unreasonable when you see the revenue expenditure is 22% reasonable internationally. If you see when you don't have income, you can't have that expenditure. So basically that has to start. It has to cut down, because our budget deficit is 2.8 trillion. We are going to borrow this year, 24, almost 7.35 trillion rupees.
My goodness me.
Last year was only 23 was only 5 trillion. So that means we are still living beyond our means. We can justify these expenditures are essential, but you can't go on. I'm wondering if government is not going to print money, and even if they achieve these numbers, you have to borrow. And this time budget says you are not going to borrow from the banking sector, because banking is also heavily pressurized. Where are you to borrow from the people? If you borrow from the people, there will be demand and supply, interest rates can go up. The interest rates can go, the cost of businesses can go up. If the interest rates goes up, then you have to bring in, inflation will go up, supply side. So again the cycle can start. So we have to look at it. Austerity programs, you have to look at it. It has to start from the people in authority. Should come on, look here, set examples, then the people will follow suit.
But we haven't seen that. We haven't seen the President as the Minister of Finance come to Parliament and present a budget where he says we are reducing every ministry's budget by 10% or 5% even. We haven't seen that at all.
Yeah, that is again, it's coming as, don't forget this is an election year. We even increases of government servants cost of living allowances is 14 million. But if you see VAT, what is expected is about additional revenue of 720 billion. So if you have say 5 million households, is about 140,000 rupees. If you average it, is that. So say if one house there is 10,000 rupees is not enough. In one of the Southeast Asian countries recently, the taxi driver said it's the same story. They give us a chicken bun with small chicken. After that they ask for the whole chicken. So now you are giving, and then you are going to ask more from the people. So this has to stop. Otherwise we are going to have a major problem. Whatever said and done, we have brought the crisis, at least on the paper, from numbers, from the government level. I am not talking the crisis that is causing to the people, at the multitude, the less privileged people, the vulnerable people, they are heavily impacted. But we are not gone into the levels of Lebanon, Argentina. We should move towards how Greece has recovered, in that sense. For that, I think revenue is hit the top. I don't think there is anything they can increase now. Consumption taxes are already there. And even if they want to have high rate of VAT, they must have a multi-rate system. Most of the countries which has a high rate of tax, VAT, they have a multi-rate system. More essential items are taxed at a lower rate. Then theorists will say this will distort economic activity. All that is true, but the people should have the means to live. The principle of capacity to pay has to be enriched in every tax reform. The taxes should be fair and reasonable. So these things has to be considered. I hope who the next government has to consider these things, because people can't take this the heavy beating they're having it. You know, everyone in this country feeling it differently. The most vulnerable are heavily impacted.
So the caviar and champagne need to be taxed at higher levels than the carrots. And on that note, I'm afraid we're out of time. Thank you very much to Mr. N.R. Gajendran, tax expert, for all your advice.
Thank you for
and
having me.
your expert views. And don't go away, because primetime news is coming up right now.
TV1 Sri